Hello and welcome to another video. So this is a pre-built video for Forest. These are all new pre-built decks that have only come out in the last week, especially as of making these videos. These haven't been out that long, but by the time we get to the end, we'll probably cover them all in a week or so. But they're all pretty okay decks. Honestly, Forest, so far from testing this one, probably going to be the lowest on my rankings at the final. Once we have the very last video, I will have an overall view of every single deck for you to check out, but I haven't gone through and purchased every deck, but I have built every deck. So every single deck has every single card that is in the pre-builts that I am playing. I just don't have the special like alt art cards and stuff like that, which is completely fine. It's basically exactly the same deck, except the alt arts of course give you things like a nice Sylvan Justice. I do have of course the Rune deck because I really like the Insight, but outside of that side note, this deck has some okay cards. Most of the value, of course, is going to be in the Legendary and Gold cards, so we are going to skip over the Bronze and Silver cards, excluding things like the animated Sylvan Justice here, which is honestly a pretty nice looking card, but Sylvan Justice just doesn't have that much value, at least in my opinion, in Forest decks now. So, the first gold being Rain Elfsmith. It's an okay card. I've seen a lot of Forest decks run it. It does good. In this deck in particular though, it doesn't have a huge amount of value. The best kind of combos you can go for are things like Flower Fairies and that card and really combo those off. But honestly, I found this deck was lacking any more aggression. Most Forest decks now are looking to be aggro Forest, which are really aggressive. And this deck, while it has some of that early game end, especially with things like Water Fairy and Leaf Man and stuff like that, it's really just lacking the other key cards that it could need. I mean, Elf General, pretty much useless at this stage, being a ward and just giving you a fairy. I mean, it's got a nice stat line, but outside of that, it hasn't got much else value. I really did like Peerless Shot, honestly. Great card, draw, evolve effect, works really well. Never got a chance to take full advantage of Korra, just couldn't get there. It just wasn't a strong enough deck to last in the current rotation format. In the future, it might be okay. As far as value goes though, Insect Lord, really good value card in pretty much every single Forest deck that you'll ever play. I don't play a lot of Forest, so it's hard to say whether Korra is in every single Forest deck, but I know it's being ran in some variants of Aggro Forest, so I can definitely say that's an okay one. As far as golds go, I think they're all pretty good value. The 3 Story Falconeer, good value. Elfsmith, pretty good. Ice Wrath, not bad, I've seen it run in a few decks. And Peerless Shot I actually quite like, especially even as a one-of, it's a nice card to have. So the overall value of this deck isn't bad. The deck itself definitely isn't great, and we are going to take a look at a couple of matches with this deck. Matches that I probably didn't win. Whether we watch the whole match, wait and see, but the main idea is that I'm just giving you an overview of these decks before we do a full big roundup, so hopefully you guys can enjoy it, and we'll get right into that. So the matchup first is going to be against Rune, probably not the best matchup overall, especially for this deck. A lot of decks, of course, you've got to consider are more refined than these Prebuilts. Prebuilts are usually a good starting point, which I really wanted to at least show off because I know that anyone who is a beginner who is spending money and buying these Prebuilts, if you are buying them to get into their game, these are probably some of the best cards you've got outside of what you might be pulling. So honestly, it's not bad. In future, I might look at ways that you could improve these. I consider doing that now, but I'm not really sure where I'd want to start by adding cards and stuff without just ended up showing you exactly what I've already done videos on. So if you do want to find out the better versions of these kind of decks, definitely check out other videos that I've done on Aggro Forest and things like that. They're pretty much the best way to look at it. So, of course, playing against more refined decks makes it very difficult on these decks, so I tried to do my best with what I had. Whether that was perfect or not, that's a whole up to you. But we got a little bit of value out of this. I really wanted to just deal some damage to the 6/6 because it's going to be a problem later on. The Forest deck, really, I couldn't find the value in its cards quite as much. I mean, they're there. I can see what it's going for. It's going to try and be aggressive with at least some defensive. But by doing that, you're sacrificing what Forest does best, and that is full board swarms to just over and over and over again. Without enough fairy generation, it can be very difficult to do that. Most of the cards you've got in this deck are single fairy generation, and the couple of cards like Elf Song that are double fairy generation, you really want to actually combo, which is a lot harder to do without a lot of setup. So I do go for the preemptive Evo, mainly just to avoid being completely cleared out too easily. Plus, it gives me a chance to deal more damage next turn. Fortunately, I should have considered that Master Mage would come down because it pretty much made that Evo a waste. While I don't always make the best plays, Forest isn't one of the classes I am the best at, so it's hard for me to give super in-depth look at this deck. But as just a general player, I definitely would not recommend this to beginners. There are just better pre-builts for beginner decks, and most of the pre-builts actually have better value, at least just by looking at them. So unless Forest is one of the classes you really lack cards for, and you've already got a heap of others, and you're a long-time player, this deck could be okay for you. But I would still recommend other decks beforehand. Overall though, I mean, it does okay. It got us up to turn 7 so far, which isn't bad. Being able to survive long term is definitely the hard part with this deck. Well, I went with Fashionista. It would have been nicer if I could have survived for longer. The Silverblade Golem definitely puts us on that clock because it is going to give them a lot of rituals. Although they did end up only being able to get one due to the fact they burned a card. So, it's not the worst case. But we are pretty much guaranteed to be dead next turn, regardless of what we do here. So, this deck, like I said, really tries to do both control and aggression, and that really ends up being a failure for it. Well, we tried to survive here pretty well, it just really doesn't play out that well. Most decks now deal very easily with early game stuff, so Forest really struggles there unless they can swarm, and this deck unfortunately just doesn't have everything it needs to swarm. And overall, I gave this deck a fairly good chance. I played 7 games with this deck, of which I only won 1 due to my opponent immediately conceding at the start of the game, so that was pretty much a useless game to me. Every other game did end in a loss. Although the deck tried its best to survive, it just couldn't hold its own in what is the current rotation format. In the future, it might do better with other cards rotating out and other cards coming in. I mean, it definitely got a chance, and with some adjustments this deck could very easily be turned into an aggro forest deck. Again, as I mentioned, I've done aggro forest videos in the past, you can check those out. The decks really haven't changed all that much. So if you did buy this forest deck and this is the one you went over every other deck, I definitely feel a little sorry for you, but it's definitely not going to be the best pre-built of the lot. And as I mentioned, I will do a full ranking at the end. I will have a video just going over every deck and then putting them in order of what I believe will be the best value to the worst value. So expect that in a week or two once I've been able to go through every deck fairly. So Story Falconeer I still think is probably one of the best cards in this deck. Unfortunately the Dragon Player did get a really good card there. I mean, you can't really go wrong with that. Being able to get zombies that can basically storm every turn is fairly high value. So it makes it very hard to come off this because those zombies are going to kill fairies pretty much every time. See, this is where I really like the Peerless Shot, being able to deal with things. Due to the fact that you always have a reasonable card count in your hand, you can pretty much clear off any reasonable card. You're not going to clear off super big cards, Flame Destroyers, anything bigger than that will be a little hard, but when you're clearing off medium range cards, that's usually pretty easy. So Force of the Dragon Unit and some damage, as you can see, really struggling to get that board to stick while also dealing with my opponent, so it makes it very difficult. I do enjoy Fashionista, although its effect is probably just a little weak, considering that you need to play the 1-drop spell on top of it. Of course, that does mean you can clear bigger things a little easier, due to the fact that Dark Dress is actually pretty good for that. But most of the time that's when you want to be more control-y, and most of the time with this deck you really want to try and be aggressive. Also, Machinid, it's a weird card. It's an okay ambush, but that's about all it's got going for it. So we tried our best to really go here. Unfortunately, our opponent really just kind of taken off on us on their own and put us at 9, where we can't really go for any base damage. Another treasure map. and a pretty decent way to deal with my board. So unfortunately they are going to get another zombie anyway, so even if we deal with this one, another one will just spawn. There's really not a lot we can do about that. We can always go face. And Inquisition is going to kill us regardless, so as I mentioned, really difficult to get that aggressive swarm out. I feel like I've repeated myself a lot about that and I do apologise, but really that's the crux of things. So my final thoughts on this deck on its own before I've checked out any of the other decks so far, outside of just looking at them, I would probably rank this at about a 3 out of 10 for playability, about 5 out of 10 for value, as it does have a couple of quite nice legendaries compared to some of the others, and the golds are actually pretty good value as well. And if you are a really new beginner, some of the silvers even aren't that bad. I mean, mainly Elf Song, because that's probably the best one, but I mean, overall, not the worst possible value for your money, but definitely not the best if you are starting out and want something playable. So if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe so I know you want more content like this, and I'll catch you guys next time. See ya.